The transition from a numbered animal to a god of the Gulag happened in the space of a single breath. Alexei stripped the corpse with the frantic, clawing hunger of a starveling. The wool of the NKVD tunic was heavy, smelling of expensive tobacco and the metallic tang of authority. When he slid his feet into the polished leather boots, he felt the ghost of the man he had just robbed settle into his marrow. He left his own rags, stiff with the lice and filth of 3 years in the mines, on the cooling meat of the real Sokolov. Let the crows decide which one was the criminal. By the time he reached the gates of Camp 12, the storm had turned the world into a white shroud. The guards at the watchtower did not see a fugitive. They saw the blue-topped cap and the crimson tabs of the state security. They saw a man who walked as if he owned the horizon. "Is the commandant expecting me?" Alexei's voice was a jagged rasp, tempered by the cold into something authoritative. The sergeant at the gate fumbled with his rifle, his face turning the color of ash. "Yes, Comrade Captain. At once, Comrade Captain." The gates creaked open, a yawning mouth of iron and wire. As Alexei stepped inside, he felt a sickening jolt of vertigo. He was walking back into the cage, but this time, he held the keys. The air inside the camp was different, thick with the scent of coal smoke, boiled cabbage, and the stagnant, sour musk of 10,000 men waiting to die. Commandant Volkov was a man built of soft edges and hard greeds. He greeted the fake Sokolov in an office lined with stolen tapestries and crates of confiscated vodka. Volkov was terrified. In the paranoid ecosystem of 1938, a surprise inspection from Moscow was a death warrant. "We have followed every directive, Comrade Captain," Volkov stammered, pouring a glass of amber liquid with a trembling hand. "The quotas are met. The sabotage is rooted out." Alexei took the glass. His fingers, still stained with the literal blood of his predecessor, gripped the crystal. He did not speak. He had learned in the university that silence is the most flexible of languages. In a world of loud accusations, the man who says nothing is the most dangerous. He simply stared at Volkov until the commandant began to sweat, despite the drafty room. "Show me the lists," Alexei finally commanded. He spent the first week memorizing the geography of his own nightmare. He walked the perimeter, watching the prisoners, his brothers of yesterday, stumble through the mud. He saw himself in every hollow-eyed man carrying a timber log. He saw his own father in the old man being kicked by a guard for dropping a shovel. The most difficult part was the mirror. Every morning, he had to shave with a straight razor, scraping away the beard of a convict to reveal the face of a killer. He began to mimic the real Sokolov's handwriting found in the leather dispatch case. He practiced the signature, a sharp, aggressive scrawl that looked like a row of bayonets, until his hand no longer shook. But a lie of this magnitude requires more than just a uniform. It requires a sacrifice. On the 10th day, a group of prisoners was brought to the correction block for slowing down production in the quarry. Among them was Ivan, the man who had shared a wooden bunk with Alexei for 2 years. Ivan, who had once given Alexei half a potato when he was delirious with typhus. Ivan looked up, his eyes, sunken and clouded with scurvy, fixed on the man in the blue cap. A flicker of impossible hope ignited in those eyes. He opened his cracked lips to speak the name Alexei. Alexei did not wait for the sound. He stepped forward and delivered a calculated, brutal kick to Ivan's ribs. As the man crumpled, Alexei turned to the guards, his face a mask of bored cruelty. "This one is faking his exhaustion. Put him in the isolator for 48 hours. No heat, no water." As they dragged Ivan away, the prisoner did not scream. He simply stared at Alexei with a look of profound, soul-crushing realization. In that moment, the linguistics professor died. There was only the captain. The system was a machine, and Alexei found he was an expert mechanic. He realized that the NKVD did not actually care about guilt or innocence. They cared about the appearance of order. He began to sign death warrants with a terrifying fluidity. He discovered that by being more ruthless than Volkov, he became untouchable. He increased the work shifts. He halved the hospital rations. He became the perfect Soviet officer because he knew exactly what the victims feared most. He was safe. He was warm. He was fed. And all it cost him was the ability to sleep without seeing Ivan's eyes. Then came the night of the great blizzard. The wind was screaming through the pines like a choir of the damned. Alexei was sitting in his quarters, nursing a bottle of cognac and reading a book of poetry he had found in Volkov's confiscated pile, when the heavy iron door of his office burst open. Volkov stood there, his face ghostly. "Comrade Captain, we have a situation at the South Gate. A patrol found a man." Alexei did not look up from his book. "Another escapee? Shoot him and be done with it." "It's not an escapee," Volkov whispered, his voice cracking. "He was coming toward the camp, from the forest. He's wearing nothing but rags, but he has a story you need to hear." The door pushed wider, and two guards hauled in a shivering wreck. The man's face was a map of black frostbite and jagged scars. He was missing 3 fingers on his left hand, but as he lifted his head, the light of the desk lamp hit his eyes. They were the same eyes Alexei saw in the mirror every morning. The real Mikhail Sokolov had crawled out of the snow. The bullet had grazed his skull, knocking him into a coma that the sub-zero temperatures had miraculously stabilized. He had wandered the taiga for months, fueled by a singular, crystalline rage. The real Sokolov looked at the man wearing his name, his rank, and his soul. He did not scream. He did not point. He simply smiled, a horrific baring of teeth. "Hello, comrade," the ghost whispered. "I believe you have something of mine." Alexei felt the blood drain from his limbs, leaving him hollow. His first instinct was to reach for the pistol, to erase the mirror before it shattered his world. But he saw the way Volkov was watching him, not with suspicion yet, but with a terrifying, animal curiosity. If he killed the man now, he would be admitting there was something to fear. "This man is clearly delirious," Alexei said, his voice as steady as a winter grave. He found the cold, clipped cadence of the officer he had murdered. "The taiga does strange things to the mind. He has heard my name whispered in the barracks and thinks he can wear it like a cloak." The real Sokolov let out a sound that might have been a laugh if his lungs were not full of fluid. You speak well, Professor," he wheezed. "I remember the way you looked at my boots before you took them. I saw you through the red haze. I watched you steal my life while I lay in the red snow." Volkov stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Comrade Captain, he says he was ambushed 3 months ago. He says he is the real Sokolov, sent from the Central Committee to replace the previous administration. He knows the serial number of of the captain's, personal sidearm." Alexei felt the sweat begin to prickle under his wool tunic. He stood up, towering over the desk, using every inch of the authority he had stolen. "Enough of this theater. This is a classic diversion, a plant, a saboteur sent to destabilize the leadership of this camp. Sergeant, take this wretch to the interrogation cellar. I will deal with him personally. No one is to speak to him. If a single word of his madness leaves that room, I will have your stripes and your heads." The guards flinched. The threat worked. Fear was the only currency that never devalued in the taiga. They grabbed the real Sokolov by his mangled arms. As they dragged him toward the door, the ghost turned his head, his eyes burning with a terrifying clarity. "I am not the ghost, Alexei," the real Sokolov whispered. "You are, and a ghost cannot breathe forever in a dead man's lungs." The door slammed shut. Alexei was alone with Volkov. The commandant was looking at the floor, his fingers twitching. He was not a brave man, but he was a survivor. He smelled blood in the air, and he was not sure yet whose it was. "Go, Volkov," Alexei commanded. "Prepare the morning reports, and double the guard on the perimeter. If there's one saboteur, there are others." When the room was finally empty, Alexei collapsed back into his chair. His heart was a trapped bird beating against his ribs. He had 3 hours before dawn. 3 hours to decide if he was a man or a monster. He looked at his hands, the soft, clean hands of an officer. To save those hands, he would have to stain them in a way that could never be washed clean. He descended into the cellar an hour later. The air was damp, smelling of salt and old iron. The real Sokolov was chained to a wooden chair. His head slumped. When Alexei entered, the guards left, closing the heavy steel door. The two men were finally alone. "Why did not you just die?" Alexei asked, his voice a low, broken whisper. The real Sokolov looked up. "Because I am the system, you fool. You think you can just put on the hat and be me? I spent 15 years becoming this. I broke my own father for the party. I sent my wife to a camp like this because she questioned a headline in Pravda. You are just a man trying to stay warm. I have run this camp better than you ever could," Alexei hissed, leaning in. "I increased the output. I streamlined the executions. I became you." Sokolov laughed, a wet, bubbling sound. "No, you became the mask. But the mask has no face behind it. Look at you. You're terrified. A real officer would not be talking to me. He would have shot me the moment I walked through that gate." You still want to be understood. You still want to be right. That is why you will fail. Alexei pulled his pistol. The metal was cold, an extension of the room's cruelty. "If I kill you, I am the only Sokolov left. And every time you look in the mirror, you will see me," the real man said, his voice gaining a haunting strength. "You will see the man you murdered not once, but twice. You will live my life, do my dirty work, and one day the system will come for you just as it came for me, because the system does not need you, Alexei. It only needs the uniform." Alexei's finger tightened on the trigger. The logic was perfect. To survive, he had to destroy the truth. He had to become the very lie that had condemned him. He thought of the university, the books, the life he once had. It was all gone, burned away by the frost. He did not fire. Instead, he leaned in closer. "Tell me the codes," he whispered. "The ciphers for the Moscow dispatches. Tell me the names of your contacts in the 3rd Department. If you want to die with dignity, give me the tools to finish your work." Sokolov stared at him for a long time. A strange look of respect, or perhaps pity, crossed his ruined face. "You really are a quick learner, Professor. Very well. If I am to be a ghost, I will give you my chains." For the next 2 hours, the prisoner lectured the officer. He gave him the secret architecture of a life built on betrayal. He told him about the mistress in Leningrad, the debt to a colonel in the NKVD, the specific way he liked his tea. He handed over his identity piece by piece, like a man stripping off layers of skin. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the high, barred windows, the real Sokolov finished. He looked exhausted, the life finally fading from his eyes now that his burden was shared. "Now, do it," Sokolov said. "Finish the promotion." Alexei stood up. He felt ancient. He felt like a hollowed-out tree. He raised the pistol. He did not think about the man. He did not think about the crime. He thought about the grammar of the act, the subject, the verb, the object. The shot was muffled by the thick stone walls. He walked out of the cellar and found Volkov waiting in the hallway. The commandant looked at the blood on Alexei's cuff. "The saboteur?" Volkov asked. "Liquidated," Alexei said. his voice devoid of any emotion. He was a lunatic. Bury him in the unmarked trench. Do not record his description. Volkov nodded, but there was a new glint in his eyes, a flicker of doubt that had not been there before. Alexei returned to his office. He sat down and picked up a pen. He began to write a report to Moscow, requesting a transfer. He could not stay here. The trees knew him. The snow knew him. But as he wrote, he realized his hand was no longer mimicking Sokolov's handwriting. He was writing in his own hand, the elegant, scholarly script of the professor. He stopped, his heart freezing. He tried again, forcing his muscles to recreate the jagged scrawl of the dead man. It was gone. No matter how hard he tried, he could only write as Alexei. The dead man had taken his handwriting to the grave as a final, silent act of sabotage. He stared at the page, a cold realization dawning on him. He had the uniform, the memories, and the power. But the one thing he needed to prove he was Sokolov, the signature on the death warrants, was a skill he had lost the moment he pulled the trigger. The paper on the desk felt like a sheet of white iron. Alexei gripped the fountain pen so hard the nib scratched a ragged furrow into the grain of the wood. He tried to visualize the signature, the sharp, predatory S that sliced downward like a sickle, but his hand refused to obey. It moved with the fluid, rhythmic grace of a man who had spent decades transcribing Old Church Slavonic. He was trapped in the muscle memory of a scholar. A knock at the door shattered the silence. It was Volkov. The commandant's eyes were bloodshot, and he carried a heavy leather folder. "Comrade Captain, the morning dispatches have arrived from the regional center. There is a mandatory confirmation required for the spring mobilization of the labor force. They need your signature on the execution of the surplus prisoners before the thaw." Volkov laid the papers on the desk. Alexei felt the air in the room grow thin. These were not internal camp memos. These were documents bound for the Central Archives in Moscow. If the signatures did not match the samples held at the ministry, the investigation would be swift, surgical, and final. "Leave them," Alexei said, not looking up. "I have a backlog of reports." Volkov did not move. His gaze lingered on Alexei's hand, which was currently trembling over a blank sheet of paper. "Actually, the courier is waiting at the gate. He has orders to return with the signed duplicates immediately. The state is in a hurry this morning." Alexei felt the noose tightening. He looked at Volkov and saw the calculation in the man's face. Volkov knew. He did not have proof, but he had the scent. He was waiting for the slip, the moment the mask fell so he could claim the captain's rations, the captain's quarters, and perhaps a medal for exposing a pretender. "I said leave them," Alexei hissed, the coldness of the grave in his voice. "Or would you like to join the courier on his return trip in a wooden box?" Volkov paled, bowed stiffly, and backed out of the room. But as the door closed, Alexei knew the clock had begun its final countdown. He had minutes, maybe an hour, before suspicion turned into action. He spent the next 30 minutes in a feverish trance, trying to break his own hand. He smashed his right fist against the corner of the oak desk, hoping that a bruised, swollen grip would explain a change in his handwriting. Pain blossomed in his knuckles, a dull, throbbing heat. But when he tried to sign the paper, the script was still his, only shakier, a ruined version of the professor, not a mimicry of the officer. He looked out the window. The prisoners were being marched to the forest. Among them, he saw a face he recognized, a young man who had been a student in his linguistics seminar 4 years ago. The boy's name was Lev. He looked like a skeleton draped in gray wool. A sudden, jagged thought pierced Alexei's panic. The system did not want the man. It did not even want the signature. It wanted the result. He took the pen and, instead of signing the name Sokolov, he wrote a single word in the margin of the death warrants. Confirmed. He did not sign it. He stamped it with the official seal of the camp command, pressing the purple ink so hard into the paper that it bled through to the other side. He then took a razor blade and made a shallow cut on his own cheek, letting a drop of blood fall onto the edge of the document. He called Volkov back in. "Take these to the courier. Tell him I am suffering from a severe bout of shingles, and my hand is too inflamed to hold a pen. The blood on the page is my signature today. The state asked for blood. I have given it." Volkov took the papers, his eyes wide. The audacity of the act seemed to stun him into submission. He hurried out. Alexei knew this was a stay of execution, nothing more. Moscow would find it eccentric for a week, then suspicious for a day, and then treasonous for a second. He had to leave. He began to pack the leather dispatch case, the one he had stolen from the real Sokolov's cooling body. He took the remaining vodka, a stack of rubles from the safe, and the small silver locket he had found in the dead man's pocket. He waited for nightfall. The blizzard had returned, a howling wall of white that promised a quick death to anyone foolish enough to enter it. It was his only chance. The guards would be huddled in their towers, blinded by the drift. He slipped out of the side door of the commandant's house, moving like a shadow against the gray wood. He reached the perimeter fence near the lumberyard, where the wire had been weakened by the shifting frost. He was halfway through the gap when a voice stopped him. "Going somewhere, Comrade Captain?" It was Lev, the student. He was huddled under a stack of frozen planks, his eyes burning with a terrifying, lucid madness. "I know who you are," the boy whispered. "I saw you in the lecture hall. I saw you talk about the beauty of the Russian verb. And I saw you today, signing the orders to kill my brother." Alexei froze. "I did what I had to do to survive, Lev. I am not Sokolov. I am one of you." "No, no," Lev said, standing up. His legs were thin as birch branches. "You are worse. Sokolov was a monster by nature. You chose to become one. You used your mind, your beautiful, educated mind, to become a more efficient butcher than they ever were. You did not steal his life. You became his masterpiece." Lev reached into his rags and pulled out a sharpened piece of rebar. He did not attack. He simply held it out toward the watchtower. "I do not need to kill you, Professor. I just need to scream." Alexei looked at the boy. He could kill him. He had the pistol. He had the training of the 3 months he had spent as a god. But as he looked into the boy's eyes, he saw the mirror again. Not the mirror of Sokolov, but the mirror of his own soul, reflected in the ruins of the boy he had failed to teach. "Scream then," Alexei said, his voice breaking. "Do us both a favor." Lev opened his mouth, but instead of a scream, a wet, rattling cough emerged. The cold had already claimed his lungs. He collapsed back into the snow, his eyes fixed on the dark sky. He died silently, a final, wordless protest. Alexei scrambled to the wire and ran. He ran until his lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. He ran until the lights of the camp were nothing but a dull, orange smudge in the white void. He was free. He was in the heart of the taiga, miles from the nearest outpost, with enough money and papers to disappear forever. But the cold was different now. It did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a welcoming embrace. He stopped in a small clearing where the trees formed a natural cathedral. He sat down against a cedar trunk and opened the leather dispatch case. He pulled out the red identification booklet. He looked at the photograph of Sokolov. Then he turned the page. Tucked behind the official documents was a small, handwritten note from the Ministry of State Security, dated 2 days before the real Sokolov had been ambushed. To Captain M. Sokolov, your performance has been reviewed. The irregularities in your previous post in Kiev have been noted. Upon arrival at Camp 12, You are to be arrested by Commandant Volkov and held for immediate execution. Your replacement is already en route." Alexei started to laugh. It was a high, thin sound that the wind snatched away. The real Sokolov had not been coming to the camp to reclaim his life. He had been fleeing his own execution. The ambush in the snow had not been a rebel attack. It had been an NKVD hit squad. And Alexei had fought, lied, and murdered just to step into a dead man's grave. He looked up as the sound of barking dogs drifted over the wind. Volkov was not coming for a pretender. He was coming for the captain. The system did not care who was inside the uniform. It had already decided that the uniform was guilty. Alexei closed his eyes. He reached into the snow and found a jagged stone. With a final, is scholar, is precision, he began to carve his real name into the ice. But before he could finish the first letter, his fingers went numb. The snow fell, thick and indifferent, burying the name, the uniform, and the lie under a single, perfect sheet of white.